Now let's talk about Bitcoin first. A couple of weeks ago when we were speaking there, Bitcoin had just reached a new high, and new highs again today. So the question people have is what's going to happen from here? Because we did talk about the $65,000 key level, which it has breached. You said that if it doesn't hit 65,000, we could potentially see a retracement all the way down to potentially, but not likely, but potentially 20,000. So that was sort of your downside target. But now that it has breached 65,000, is it just a straight shoot up to the upside to 100,000 perhaps, or do you see a different story?
So we don't know yet, and that's the simple but complex answer is that you did breach 65,000. So what that means is if you look at the chart here, you can see we pierced it here, we had a quick retrace, we pierced it a couple days, and then we've come back below it. So number one, what I was doing in the previous interviews is we were comparing it to past cycles, past 4-year cycles in Bitcoin, where you definitely saw this kind of retrace. In fact, let me bring up the charts. Here's the 2013 cycle, and you can see we had the high here, we retraced. We never took out that 1250 level like we did recently. So that what that means is it's different than the previous cycles. And if we go to this cycle, which was the 2017 cycle, same thing. You had a big drop, a big retrace, but you never took out 20,000 before it bottomed out. So what that tells us is that this cycle, it doesn't necessarily tell us that this isn't a cycle top, meaning it's still technically a double top resistance. It's still struggling around the April 2021 highs. But you can't, as a technical analyst, compare it to past cycles. You can't say, oh, this is exactly the same.
Right.
So as a technician, I have to look at that and I say, okay, I have to go back to the drawing board. This isn't like the past cycles. It may still be a top. Ultimately, I still believe that when a deleveraging event occurs in the stock market, you will see a significant decline. The question is, how low will that decline go? Just to put it in perspective, yesterday or 2 days ago, we saw a big drop in the stock market. And Bitcoin initially was up that day and ended up flushing, which shows that that deleveraging event, even as minor as it was in the stock market, did have an impact on Bitcoin. So I do want investors to be aware that if the stock market does start to come down, then likely it will take Bitcoin down in the short term, even though long term, I think it will do very, very well.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this price pattern that we've seen in 2013, 2017. I'd like to draw your attention to one minor difference that I've noticed, which is that in the past, when Bitcoin has hit a top, we've seen this double top pattern that you talked about, but the second top was always lower than the first top, right? 2013 and 2017. This time it's the reverse. The second top here is higher than the earlier top we saw in the springtime of this year. Does that mean anything to you?
And it very well may. I mean, so technically on a basis of the chart, you're still fighting that level. So you're still struggling, but you're right that this is the first time out of the last 2 cycles that we've made a higher high. So what I'm really following here is, can we really break above significantly this $65,000 high? The one concern I have is the highs recently have been made just as that Bitcoin ETF came out. And I do wonder if the hype around that got a few extra buyers in the space to push it above briefly that high. Again, on a technical basis, it's still struggling at double top. So I'm watching to see, but there's no doubt in my mind that you can't compare it now to past cycles.
True. So for somebody who is observing on the sidelines now, Gareth, should he get in or should he wait?
So I would wait to find out what it's doing here at the double top. The last thing an investor wants to do is jump in right at the highs. Like if double tops historically, whether they're stock charts or crypto charts, they can be significant highs before major moves to the downside. So the last thing an investor wants to do is put new capital without knowing for sure that this is a major break to the upside. Now, if it gets kind of above the recent highs and holds above 65,000 for a week or two, then yeah, I think it's going to at least 75 to 77,000. That's my next calculated resistance level. And then if it gets through that, you could see 100,000. I'm skeptical by year end, as a lot of people are saying, but obviously the charts will tell us what the direction is.
Well, you sound a little bit more bullish now, or at least more hopeful. I wouldn't use the word bullish, but more hopeful now than 2 weeks ago in Dubai. Actually, you share the sentiment of a lot of people. I mean, most people in the cryptoverse, as I like to call it, are a lot more bullish than you. Actually, all the time. But now in particular, you're seeing altcoins rise, right? You saw what happened with Ethereum, new all-time highs. Shiba Inu, I don't know if you read, but this guy, $8,000 he invested in Shiba Inu last year. Now the account is at $5.7 billion. I think he took profits a little bit, but that's still a crazy Crazy
Yeah.
return, probably the best trade of all time. And then we got things like Squid Game coin, which spiked up in one day and they got rug pulled and people lost a lot of money. So my
Yeah.
point is the alt space is also doing really well. It's not just Bitcoin. So there seems to be a lot of momentum in cryptos overall.
Yeah, and just keep an eye on the one thing I always want to put out to everyone viewing this is that, for me, it's all about the chart. So a lot of people rely on FOMO and emotion to look at where they think Bitcoin is going. For me, I just try to keep a logical sense about, okay, well, what is the chart telling me? So initially, before we got to 65,000, I had to say, okay, well, the likelihood is it's a repeat of the previous cycles, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. It didn't get up to these highs. Now you could still see a drop off double top, but you can't say, okay, it's going to have the same sort of massive retrace that we saw in previous cycles because the charts don't necessarily match up. So it's a matter of really just letting the charts tell you what the likely probabilities are of the move versus you saying, oh, my gut tells me it's going to 1 million, so I'm just going to go with that.
Okay, I'd like to link this back to macro now. Bitcoin and the Federal Reserve. It's not a topic that we talk about a lot, but as Bitcoin matures into an asset class that institutional investors are playing into, I think it's important to link it back to some of the fundamentals. So, as you know, CPI numbers came in this week, hottest number on record since 1990. So the highest inflation reading we have had in 30 years. What does this mean for the crypto space? Does this do you consider cryptos an inflation hedge, as some people might say? Could Bitcoin climb even higher now that inflation seems to be running hot?
So the one awesome thing that I saw in Bitcoin was when that CPI number came out on this past Wednesday, right? I think it was Wednesday, is that we did see cryptocurrency shoot to the upside. You saw Bitcoin literally intraday take off for about 30 minutes to 40 minutes straight up. And that's very key for the long-term success of Bitcoin in terms of being a digital gold or a way to curb your exposure to inflation. So that was really positive. The only negative was that then the rise in interest rates because of the hot CPI caused kind of this sell-off in the stock market that eventually brought cryptocurrency back down. But I love seeing the reaction that makes it kind of the gold type play, where again, I do believe that long-term it is the digital gold of the future.
Why do you think? Okay, so you said that the fall in the stock markets brought Bitcoin down a little bit. Why are they correlated, do you think?
So there's no doubt that there's so much liquidity in the system and there's so much leverage. I mean, we know about people taking 20-to-1 leverage in the crypto markets, in the stock market. There's people that are using maximum margin. And what happens is it all bleeds through. So, like me, I have a cryptocurrency. In fact, I have a couple cryptocurrency accounts. I have stock trading accounts. If I were to get a margin call because the stock accounts drop significantly, I'm going to be more inclined to take money from my crypto account and move it over to my stock account to cover those margins. So it's all intertwined. Also, you have the fear factor, right? So the stock market starts to decline. People say, okay, what are the riskiest assets? Where do I have to protect myself? Cryptocurrency is still on a short-term basis a risky asset to a lot of big players, and therefore it's going to create a little sell pressure there.
So if interest rates go up, what's going to happen to Bitcoin?
So if interest rates go up and the market sells sharply because of it, then ultimately I think Bitcoin comes down in the near term as it becomes more of a stable asset that protects against inflation. Now, right now you have a lot of this FOMO and hype in there that really skews the real price of Bitcoin, in my opinion. But eventually, as it matures and is taken on by pension funds and hedge funds and becomes that kind of thing that older Americans and older people around the world put in their investment accounts for retirement, it will take on a kind of a good quality asset in times of turbulence. But it just isn't there. It's not mature enough at this point.
It sounds to me, based on your description of past events, that Bitcoin is performing like a leveraged play on stocks, on the S&P and NASDAQ. I wouldn't, based on what you've described, I wouldn't buy Bitcoin to diversify away from my stocks. I would buy it to gain leverage. Is that a fair statement to make, or would you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, considering the Fed has pumped so much liquidity into this market that it all obviously bleeds over into cryptocurrency. I mean, it's all bubbles, right? The markets are bubbles. Cryptocurrency is a bubbles. Even as much as I like long-term Bitcoin, I still think it's a bubble in the near term because there's so much liquidity into the system. So you're right about that. I think there is kind of a leveraged impact about, if the stock market goes up 1%, it's very likely that Bitcoin can go up 2 or 3 or 4% for that same sort of move of liquidity.
All right, one more question on Bitcoin and we'll move on. So actually, when you made the $20,000 call, now let's just clarify. Now, you didn't say it's going to happen right away. You just said it's possible that it could happen down the line. You gave a lot of people some hope because people waiting on the sidelines are thinking, yeah, it's going to go down to $20,000, my buying opportunity. But it hasn't happened yet, Gareth. Are you still sticking to that, or are you changing your outlook?
You're right. So that's very important, right? So what I said was it'll see a 20,000 or even sub 20,000 handle when you see a deleveraging in the entire system. We haven't seen that in the stock market yet, right? I mean, yeah, you've seen little pullbacks like on Wednesday off of the hot CPI, but we certainly haven't seen a 20% drawdown in the stock market. That'll be the real test. You know, how low does it go when you see kind of a 1 month or 2 month period in the stock market where we lose 20% or 25%? And that's where I think the buying opportunity will be, because people will sell cryptocurrency in panic as they get fearful of the stock market, liquidity crunch, margin calls. We have to be logical at those points, and at those dips, pick it up for the longer term thesis. So just to be clear, I'm not really long cryptocurrency right now. I'm still on the sidelines. I still am looking at the double top, but I will absolutely be looking to buy on key pullbacks at key levels.